Hey, welcome to Stackable Church. We're glad that you joined us for a live stream on building virtual teams or team building virtually. And looking forward to our three presenters who have a lot of experience with both staff teams as well as volunteer teams. Now, I know we're in moments where everything is starting to shift in terms of culture and society. And what I want to be able to do, sorry, friends, I'm getting some feedback here. Uh, Nobody knows where the church is actually going to be going or how it will emerge on the other side or even the not-for-profit world, but we do know that people are still going to need us. We know that people will need help mentally, emotionally, socially, physically, and of course spiritually. So the need will be there, but how we deliver those services, well, I think they've changed forever. I think there will be aspects that will have a resemblance of where we've been in the past and the familiarity piece to it. But certainly, the way we're working and the way we're delivering those systems has not only shifted and changed, but will continue to emerge in the other side of COVID-19 in a way that will be both challenging but filled with opportunity. Many of you may have already experienced, even in this COVID-19 season, it's been clarifying. As challenging it may be, I see some really healthy and good things emerging. And it makes me quite excited in someone leading a local church as to what might be on the other side. But I'm really excited about this conversation where we're going to have the opportunity to hear from three people that are going to help us build virtually right now for what will emerge on the other side. And I'm even going to put them on the spot to look into their crystal ball and say, what will work look like in the not-for-profit church world on the other side of COVID-19? So if you haven't already, jump into the chat room. Richard is, and I'll introduce him in a moment, he'll be curating questions. You can participate in this conversation by letting us know maybe on the backside of someone's comments you have a question or something to follow up on. Or of course, you can always just affirm the rest of the group with some points maybe that our presenters make that ring true to you and you feel would be memorable or good for others to highlight or notice. As well, as always, jump into the chat room and let us know if there are other future streams that you think might be helpful to resource you. We're just doing these in this moment, in this pocket of time, because we want to come alongside churches and not-for-profits and help us all navigate and win through this. So let me introduce our communicators, and then we'll get started in our conversation. So I'll start with Nalini Sen, and Nalini is the Director of Research and Knowledge and Translation Exchange at the Alzheimer's Society of Canada. She brings 17 years of experience in research programs for national and not-for-profit health organizations in Canada, including communication strategies, cultivating partnerships, both in the private and public sector. Nalini leads a lot of teams, and she's pivoted to lead them virtually, and I'm looking forward to hear from her. She's also the chair of our board at One Church TO, and so glad to have her voice at the table. And then Phil Kniesel. Phil is coming from Edmonton, Alberta today. He pastors Hope City Church. It's one of the largest churches in Canada, but it's also one of the most innovative ones. And Phil's voice, his ability to communicate both to the emerging generation and the next generation and people far from God, as well as to form a sense of team. His would be one of those churches we look to nationally for innovation. And you'll see that even as he communicates and just the way Phil leads in that area. He has a vision, and their vision is audacious there at Edmonton to reach 1% of the population at Hope City Church. And we'll be talking to him as he's led and pivoted his team to be able to meet virtually and how he's building that sense of team and what work will look like in his context on the other side. And then Wilson Lung. Wilson is the Director of Graduate Leadership Studies at Ryerson University in Toronto, Ontario here. He's also the Director of Leadership at Vision 7 International. It's one of the top 40 marketing firms in the world with over 1,000 employees. He holds a doctorate specializing in leadership, has a passion of helping individuals and executives flourish in their capacity. He's also, he and his wife, Rani, run a foundation called Thinking Forward, and it's an incredible charity that builds character in inner city youth and children in endangered or at-risk communities. So thankful for the three of you being a part of it. Why don't you all say a quick hello?
It's such a pleasure to be here. Thanks so much for including me in this. Looking forward to the discussion.
Yeah, hi there, everyone. And Jonathan, thanks for asking me to be a part of this. It's always great to be on a table with exceptional leaders and just hearing their input. And just, I even grow at times like this and just learn. And so, love this opportunity and just met Nalina and Wilson and already just, I'm excited for the conversation. So, thanks a lot, bro.
Thanks, Jonathan, for the opportunity to be here around this table. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
That's great. And Richard, why don't you introduce yourself? I want you to jump in the chat room because Richard will be lonely without you there. He is the music pastor at One Church TO. He's a creative genius. He doesn't like me saying these things, but he really is. He's a great hip hop artist. You can check him out on Spotify under his stage name Komodo. But he's going to be facilitating our conversation in the chat room. Why don't you say hello, Rich, and then we'll get started.
Hey, how you doing? My name is Richard, and I'm simply the host today. So these guys are awesome. That's all.
Well, let's start the conversation with you, Phil, and in your context, because maybe some of our listeners, they may not know your context. Why don't you talk a little bit about Hope City Church, the volunteer and the staffing side, and maybe even I would love you if you'd be able to express, like, were you doing virtual work before COVID-19 hit? And since, what have been some of the ways that you pivoted the team and others to create and make sure they stay connected while you're probably in all different areas across the Edmonton area?
Sure. Yeah. Just for some context, Hope City is a multi-site, multi-service church, and so our average weekly reach is around 4,500-5,000 people. So we go into it's larger than most churches. Our staff team exists of 60 people, and then we have at least 1,800 volunteers in our orbit. And I mean, that can fluctuate, give or take, just different ministries that are happening at that time. So that gives you a quick snapshot of what our church is like, who we are, and what it entails. In regards to working virtually pre-COVID, I'll say it this way. Virtual was something that was based only on necessity, not preference, if you get what I mean by that. So if someone was out of town, if someone was away for something and they really couldn't make it in the building in person, well, then we would resort to, okay, maybe our Teams or maybe Zoom or something like that. But it was definitely on necessity, not preference. And I'll just say flat out, part of that is because of me as the leader. I preferred in-person stuff. I was like, hey, in the office, face-to-face meetings, team meetings that way. And I'll just say my perspective of the wins of face-to-face versus virtually over these past 2 months has been challenged in a really good way. So I've been growing through this. Prior to COVID, most of our staff team was on something called Microsoft Teams, which I'm sure many of you are aware of. It's just a channel for communication. We've been on that a number of years already. This has been a lifeline specifically during this season of COVID. And I mean, you could find any information you needed, or you could communicate with anyone, not just whole staff. It wasn't just all staff emails going out or all department emails. It was very segregated and specific to those people involved for those situations. So that was a win. On a church platform, we were streaming our services 3 years already online. So online world wasn't new for us. And so that was something that just was easy to wrap our heads around. But I think, it's at times like this where you don't anticipate stuff as a leader, and it forces you to do something that you never actually thought you would do. And so let me unwrap that a little bit. Some of the learnings, Jonathan, that for me have been pretty big was you got to get really good at making decisions in the moment. Like, things were changing rapidly. Things were, every day it seemed like something was new coming down, and we're like, how are we going to shift an entire organization? How are we going to shift this many people? And you said it already, like, the buzzword out there has been pivot. How do we pivot? How do we situate ourselves to do what we need to do? And sometimes, I don't know about the rest of you guys on the call, I felt it was like multiple times a day where you're like, oh shoot, now we got to switch to this, now we got to do that. And that builds leadership muscle, and it makes you have to step up. So I love that kind of stuff. And one of the things that we're really learning is that virtual actually works, man. Like, it actually has lift and impact. You can build team cohesiveness. You can build connectedness through virtual platforms. But then I would say this, it works to a point. Because in this season, we've got people who need to be adaptable. We got people who are going to engage. But I know our team misses the physical in-person connection. I've heard that over and over again. I've heard that from our volunteers. I've heard that from our church. So some of the things that we have done as a staff is once a week, I do an all-staff Zoom call. So there's like 60 of us on there. It's typically only about 20 minutes long. It's me speaking vision or encouragement. It's thoughts. It's important updates. In our church context, it could be just yesterday, one of our worship pastors led our whole team in time of worship. And then I just had us listen to God and pray a bit. And so it was actually moving, and we really sensed togetherness through that. So we do that on a weekly basis. It's a good platform for that. I was processing, the question, because you gave us these questions in advance, obviously, just to get us thinking a little bit here, Jonathan. But virtual forces us to do some good things. And two off the top of my head, I think, would be if you're an organization that is plagued with long meetings, because meetings can be the death of a lot of people, virtual keeps it targeted and to the point. I think that's a win. Because no one wants to hang out long on virtual, right? Just tell me why we're meeting, tell me why we're doing this, and let's move on. The second thing that I thought was really good about virtual is it promotes freedom, which increases staff morale and engagement to the vision as a whole. And it's always a win for your team players in that way. One of the things we did prior to COVID as an entire staff, we used to have Wednesday afternoon happy hour, which took place in our cafe for team just to come together. We would serve them drinks out of our cafe and all that kind of stuff. And it wasn't mandatory, it was optional. So anyone who wanted to be a part of that could. And we'd just hang and chill. And if you could make it, it was great. So COVID hit and we were like, first month, we weren't doing it. And then our exec pastor just said, hey, Phil, we should do like happy hour online. And I'm like, yeah, we should, do that connection. So now people come with their coffees and their drinks to the Zoom happy hour meeting Wednesday afternoon. And it's another way that we're finding connection as a team and building into team through that, because everyone craves that, hey, how are you doing? What's going on? How's life going? And they just want to talk about that, because you can't segregate every meeting just to being about on point business, if you want to call it that. So those are just some of the thoughts I had there.
That's great. Like I know if someone's listening and their context might not be as large as yours is, I love a couple of principles you highlighted. And the first is maybe, rigidly thinking that in-person was better and you had to pivot, for lack of a better word. But, there's a sense of us letting go as leaders, right? In this season,
Totally.
To be able to embrace something different. And yet too, even as we look at the future of the church, how it's going to emerge on the other side. Well, we'll get to that, I guess, at the last question, because I think a lot of these good learnings are something we're going to want to take with us. But I do think there are going to be aspects that we'll have to let go of when we emerge on the other side.
I'm with you, yeah.
So Nalini, let me talk with you. And I know, Nalini, that you have led a team that you talked about. They thrived, maybe a little bit like Phil talked about. They thrived in an analog environment. They really did. They thrived in that, and they struggled initially, certainly emerging into a digital world and meeting virtually and meeting the needs of the team in that sense. So I wanted to ask you, how did you pivot an analog team that you'd be working with to be productive and connected in a virtual setting? So, non-digital natives to embrace a virtual reality. How was that with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is something that is entirely new for our team. They're used to really interacting in face-to-face environments, and it's the very first time that the entire team is connecting digitally. And I have to admit, some people are completely out of their element, and for others, they enjoy it. But for me, my focus has been in some specific areas, and I'm referring to them as the 3 C's: care, communicate, and connect. Those are the main areas that I'm focusing on in really helping to transition the team to adapt to this new digital environment. For care, it's important to really listen and to understand how they're adjusting to this change. Is this something that they're comfortable with? What are their concerns, and how can I support them with that? And communicate. I want to ensure that I'm messaging communication of trust, transparency, and accountability. I want to make sure that the staff is aware of the fact that, I'm aware of the fact that there are going to be competing priorities that they're going to be faced with working from home. It's going to be very difficult for people to separate their personal lives from their professional lives, as everything is happening all at once. People are having to take their dogs for a walk and take care of their children at home. So I'm going to introduce to them the opportunity for flexibility, but I want to communicate with them that there's trust in understanding that, I know that you're going to be utilizing your time as effectively as possible so you can eventually get your work done. But then there's also transparency. I've incorporated a more frequent update mechanism within the team where I'm connecting with them on an ongoing basis and really trying to find out for them, what are you working on? How is it going, and how can I more effectively support you during this period? Also, there's accountability. Despite the fact that there's ongoing flexibility that I'm extending to the team, I want to make sure that they know that they're still accountable to achieve their goals and to complete their objectives. And that's something that when they do so, it's also contributing to the overall success of the team. But in addition to that, it's important that we remain connected. And one thing that was mentioned earlier is, it's the first time that we're really connecting through video calls, and every meeting that we have is through a video mechanism. We also use Microsoft Teams, and we use Zoom on an ongoing basis. And that's something that, I don't know why we haven't done this before, to be quite honest. I think it's quite effective. It's much better than teleconferences, which is what we used to use. And it's giving us an opportunity to really connect with people and seeing their facial expressions and body language. It's almost like being in the same room with them, which I appreciate. And one thing that I feel is helpful with this is when we do connect, we have different types of meetings. I have a team meeting that really allows for all members of the team to make a contribution. And in fact, that's the expectation that I place, that this is something that helps the introverts and the extroverts on the team. It gives them an opportunity to be prepared for the meeting and to come and to share their thoughts. It also allows for cross-collaboration and more integration within the team. The second type of meeting I offer and support is a one-on-one meeting. I want to understand how you're doing with your own personal objectives. Are there any personal concerns you're experiencing as a result of isolation as well? How can I meet those needs and support you in a more intimate capacity? And then the third type of meeting is more of a social opportunity. So it's non-work related. We have a standing virtual coffee break that we offer to our team every day at 11 a.m. and it's optional. They don't have to attend, but it's an opportunity to connect and just to talk about how your day is going. And then we also have an opportunity for the whole team to meet for 30 minutes where one team member will lead an initiative and activity, such as a virtual pop quiz sort of initiative. Last week it was someone's birthday. I had a PowerPoint presentation with 20 questions. How well do you really know this person? We've had a live book club that we've done, and then somebody offered hula hoop lessons. So that's something that I'm going to be looking forward to as well. But it's an opportunity for us to become stronger as a team when we connect in these ways. And that's something that seems to have been effective so far.
It's interesting, a hula hoop. I'm still laughing about that. But it is interesting that both you and Phil have talked about there is a fun aspect that you're trying to cultivate in the team virtually, and a community aspect where it has nothing to do with productivity necessarily, but we kind of know in leadership and building virtual teams or building teams even in analog environments, they are aspects of productivity. A team that is cared for and loved and has fun, or as you mentioned, even Nalini, that trust factor when that's there. And trust and accountability sometimes feel like competing values in some organizations. And you think, I'm thinking of a pastor in a smaller church with volunteer-led teams, mostly maybe one staff member. It can be. There's a book written years ago about the speed of trust, right? The organization moves at the speed of trust. And I wonder, Nalini, because I've seen you demonstrate this in the way, whether it's in a church context or in your professional world, your ability to communicate care and trust, but actually hold the accountability up that, hey, we are doing something here together. Do you feel the tension, Nalini, holding those? Are they competing values, or do you really see them as connected values that way?
I think that when we're transparent with our teams and demonstrating, I'm giving you this flexibility, but I'm trusting that you're going to utilize your time as effectively as possible. They're really intrigued by that, and I think that they want to give you even so much more in return. I think that when we're able to meet them halfway and really understand what they're going through personally, especially within this existing climate that we're enduring, I think they appreciate it and they want to go above and beyond to actually meet the overall objectives of the team's goals. And so I don't see that there has been a challenge that I've experienced directly. What I also have been trying to do is work with each individual in meeting their objectives and in ensuring that they're carrying out the accountability of fulfilling those goals. And so I do that on a weekly basis when we have our weekly check-ins. I say, how's the work plan going? How are those objectives? And if you're falling short, how can I support you? Or should we put that on pause for now? And they appreciate that engagement. And it's a support mechanism that I use along the way. So it's been okay so far.
That's great, Nalini. And I've been in a small context, I've been in a larger context, and I've undervalued often those one-on-one meetings that are critical for the health of your team, whether volunteer-led or staff-led, but also critical for that connection to build the accountability towards the mission that you're trying to accomplish together. So those one-on-ones are a great example of that. So Wilson, in preparation for this, we had a little conversation, and you said something that stood out to me. You said, leadership comes first, location comes second. So I wanted to ask you, what do you mean by that? And then on the backside of that too, how do the principles of leadership apply to virtually building a teamwork in your mind and in your practice?
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. I came across this concept in a really interesting book called Long Distance Leader. And with our current kind of global state of the pandemic and just with kind of growing advances in technology, we obviously have a greater reliance now on these, online video conferencing apps, which has given us the ability to lead teams and to be part of teams from anywhere, right? Literally any location in the world. But I think it's important for us to remember that all of these online apps are simply tools, right? They might be newer approaches, a newer format to doing things, but really the foundation is still about leadership. Leadership is still essential. And despite the differences in location, whether you're in a boardroom or in kind of a virtual conference room, leadership is still at the core of it. So in terms of some of the leadership principles, I think that these principles still need to be applied in a virtual context. So things like vision, having this direction for some positive change, you're actually moving somewhere as a team and as an organization. Goals and outcomes. I think even though we're in this pandemic and the future is unpredictable, I think it's still important to establish some tangible, concrete goals that can help motivate and inspire teams toward action. I think things like emotional intelligence are so important. Being socially aware of what others are experiencing, especially when it comes to some negative emotions, things like anxiety or frustration, stress, loneliness. So it's important for leaders to be able to pick up on these things and then to be able to relationally manage these appropriately. I think of other leadership principles like communication. There's a great phrase that I've always appreciated. It's listening with the eyes. Not listening just with the ears, but listening with the eyes. So you're not just hearing what somebody is saying, but you're actually paying attention to their body language, their facial expressions, even listening for their tone of voice and how they're responding to something can actually give you indicators of what they're actually feeling. And then I think things like authentic leadership. And we've already talked earlier about things like transparency and trust, but these are essential aspects that we need to communicate even virtually.
Wilson, you just said a lot, because there's a lot of there in terms of leadership. And if you were talking to a leader right now and they're trying to navigate this digital virtual world, and I think I can appreciate what Phil said at the beginning and Nalini said of her team. There's something about the physical environment that connects us in a way, and it's beyond touch, obviously. Maybe it's the 3D aspect or 4D aspect of being in the same room with someone, that their presence and everything. When you think of that leadership capacity with the virtual teams that you may lead or you interact with, whether with the marketing team or with Ryerson University, what if you were going to say, if you could do one thing as a leader to elevate that team building aspect, and maybe it's one of the things you've said, but you'd say, hey, if you want one thing to take home, this is what you should take home from this. This will help you leadership wise to virtually build your team, whether volunteer based or staffing based.
Yeah, I think, with all of these growing advances in technology, I mean, I think that's wonderful. I think that's fantastic. I think that we have more tools now, more ways to connect with people than ever before. So there's been no other time in human history that we've had more tools of connection. But for me, it's more than just about connection, but are we really communicating with each other? And so rather than just kind of scratching the surface, and it's so easy with some of the social media, platforms and such, that we're scratching the surface of really getting to know each other and really going deep in some of our interpersonal relationships. So I would say as a leader in a virtual world, don't miss out on that. I think that is such a crucial aspect. And I think that's where the long-lasting impact comes in. It's not just, again, connecting at a surface level, but it's going deeper. Nalini mentioned before about, this idea of caring and connecting. And I think that is such a critical piece as a leader to be able to dive deep into these things.
Thanks, Wilson. And, I'm going to turn to you, Phil. And I was thinking of, even as you were describing some of where your team has been and where you presently are, maybe letting the cat out of the bag a little bit. What are you working on in terms of digitally? How are you looking to continue to form team, or even how it will inform the ministry moving forward? Already looking ahead, do you already have in your mind some things that you're going to know we're going to let go of? We're going to go back into physical or analog gatherings or whatever moments we're going to let go of these things. And what maybe is emerging, or at least on the front of your radar, you're starting to say, I think this is a change we're going to hold on to.
Yeah.
Where are you at with that?
Yeah, good questions. I would say first and foremost, we're still processing this, but some of the targeted things that I can see happening in our orbit is definitely a hybrid model of what our staff is going to look like. So I talked earlier about preference versus necessity. I think we're going to go higher on preference and lower on necessity, meaning virtual can be someone's preference, and we're going to allow that, and we're going to see how that works. We've actually created right now 2 Zoom meeting rooms in the church, which allows team then to come. There's couches, there's big screen TVs with great audio and mic and all that kind of stuff, so that they don't have to sit in front of their computers, and allows those that are in the building to successfully be in the room together, but then also connect with those who aren't. So we're creating space to make this happen and showing our team that, okay, this is something we value. This is something we're going to look into and move forward towards. So that's been a big shift for us because we haven't had that before. We're also looking at office sharing right now. Now, we share offices, I guess I would say workspace sharing. So if an employee wants to be in 2 days a week but work remotely 3 days, could someone else use the desk or the space the other 3 days that they're not there? So we're just toying with that and seeing what that could look like and what that could mean. So really employee flexibility on that side of things, and giving our team a little bit more freedom, because what we have discovered is remotely and virtually, we're still getting everything done. And everything's still moving forward. And, Nalini talked about goals and everything that we need to set up and go after. And we're having those and we're achieving those. And so to my surprise, I'm going, this is actually working. This is great. And so that's something we're continually pushing towards. From leading a church online in this season, Jonathan, that online's not going away. So post-COVID, even as we start meeting, our online experience used to be, hey, tune in with us, join us, and you can kind of see what's happening in the building, right? But it's kind of like a tease. Yeah, I wish you were here. Whereas I think post-COVID, online needs to be an experience exactly for the viewer, and including all departments. So it's not a looking into what's happening into the building. We want to actually create it so it's an experience for the viewer. So that means different experiences occurring and happening. And in light of that, I am looking at shifting a portfolio on our team to an online pastor position to just take that and dream with that and lead with that and take our church where we need to go there. So those would be some of the shifts that we're doing. You talked about what we need to let go of. There's some things, obviously, the in-person meetings are things that I struggle with letting go of. I'm just being total candid and honest with you guys here, but I'm moving towards that and I'm allowing a little bit of that to go. For me, I love to plan. I love painting a vision that's like a year or two ahead. I love this perfect picture. I love certainty. I love going after that. I'm learning that in this season, you can't go that far ahead. And so being okay of just feeling a little bit of that uncertainty, being okay with not knowing what 3 months ahead holds and not feeling like you're a crappy leader because you don't, that's something for me that I've been wrestling with and the tension of that. And so I think those are things that you just got to let go of and yet still do your due diligence, do your work and say, yes, I'm going after this, but recognize everything can shift on a dime here. So those are some of the things I've been working through. I really want to hold on to team flexibility. We're going to hold on to this digital and virtual reality and this hybrid that I talked about. But we have core team days, we have team meetups, we have happy hours. Like I said, in person, I still want those. I think those are big wins for us, and they always bring lift. We do a once a month team breakfast in person. Each department hosts the breakfast, does it. We're not going to let that go once we're able to, get past all this food sharing and all that kind of stuff that we're not allowed to do at this point still. So the thing that I don't want to hold on to as well is I don't want to have any sacred cows. Okay. So I want to be flexible enough and just say, hey, I don't know if this is working. If it's not working, let's pivot, let's shift, let's be okay to say, okay, this isn't working. And let's move forward to stuff that is working. And so I think from a personal level, for me, it's not just always saying, no, this has worked. This has always worked. I know it works. It's kind of saying, hey, I'm not going to hold anything sacred. And in that, just the key for me is listening to our younger staff. Listening to their perspective, listening to their whys and the reason they're thinking the way they are and what they think works best. It's not always the right answer, but listening and then formulating and moving forward in that. So those are just some thoughts there, Jonathan, on my perspective.
Question to follow up on that, because you just said we're still processing, and I appreciate that, because I think that's a real honest statement for anyone leading right now. But you lead people, as I would, and others that love certainty.
Yeah.
So, and I think too, some of us online, like some of us as leaders, we love certainty. And so to hold things so loosely, or to be willing to, we've been having discussions about how we do funding and everything else. And, there always will be an element desiring certainty and certainty always looks like the past. Certainty never looks like the future, right? How are you helping yourself not only mentally pivot, but people around you, leaders around you and others, both volunteer and staff, to be okay with uncertainty?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think part of it is we have certainty for today. So lead with what you can be certain of. So today, there's a lot of certainty that I can give our team, a lot of certainty that I can give our volunteers and our church. But then the other side of it is there's a faith component, there's a trust component, there's an aspect where you say, okay, God's bigger, God knows, God is in this. And so as we move forward, we trust the Lord, and the Lord speaks, the Lord directs, the Lord guides. I think, if we're going to draw a biblical perspective out of this, and that's just where I go, because dude, I'm a pastor, and that's just where you land, right? But the reality is, Israel traveled for 40 years without uncertainty, or with uncertainty, right? And they just didn't know what one day to the next did. And yet God was orchestrating them on this journey, on this path to make them who they needed to be. And I think just being okay with that and recognizing the faith aspect and the trust aspect on God and on what we need to do there.
we were reflecting on just the rate of change, and someone said this to me, and I thought it was insightful that older generations they've experienced a lot of change. They've never experienced the rapid rate of change that we're in right now.
Right.
And that uncertainty is something that creates anxiety, which creates control, right? And I think it's an interesting analogy, even of the children of God walking through the desert for those 40 years. That's a great illustration of daily trust, right?
Right.
Fantastic, man. Well, Nalini, in terms of leading teams virtually, and you alluded to it when you're even talking about accountability, but I'm going to talk about capacity. So we're in season. We don't know how long this is going to be. I think we're preparing as an organization, as a church here, that we could end 2020 not in physical gatherings, waiting for COVID second wave to hit. The medical professionals, the epidemiologists are prepping us all, and I know it might be different in different regions of the nation where you're actually watching from, and I know some of them are experiencing less than we are here, but I know that they're all preparing us as being one of the last groups that will be enabled to meet again because we're not an essential business. And we felt nothing but support, though, from the government and how key our role is. But we can't tread water in this season. So I want to talk about capacity, because if it's just about ticking some boxes to get through this season, we're not going to emerge on the other side stronger and agile and ready to move. What are you doing to build the capacity of your team? Even as you've said, they're more of an analog team that's gone virtual. How are you building their capacity in this foreign environment to them?
Yeah, I think one of our main goals as leaders is to do what we can to enable the success of our teams. I know that that's something that's incredibly important to me. And one exercise I recently went through, which is probably something many of you have endured as well, is I've had to review our budget and our strategic priorities for the organization, and have, as a result, reduced the investments that we're placing in certain initiatives. It was either reducing projects or individual goals and objectives where they want to really enhance themselves professionally. And I've narrowed these plans with an AIM, A-I-M. So plans that are now achievable, are impactful, and are measurable. And they're achievable in the sense that I want to ensure that there's still a challenge that's incorporated within these plans, but that they're attainable, so that they're able to attain the objectives that they want to achieve within themselves, while also meeting our strategic objectives. I want to also ensure that they're impactful, so that I think it's imperative that staff are aware of the value that they're putting into within their work, so that their efforts are going to something that's bigger and more impactful and significant than what they may realize. And drawing that out, mapping that out for them is very important. So I always make sure to clarify and to reinstate for the team that, this effort, this initiative that you're working on, it's directly related to our strategic plan, but also to our mission, which is to help to improve the lives of people living with dementia based on the area that I'm working within. And so there's always value that's added to that. And measurable, this is something that's also very important. It's important for the individuals who are working on projects to be able to effectively identify what they want to see at the end of their goal, what they want to be able to achieve. And so, for instance, one person has been given the task to host 10 national webinars over the course of the fiscal year. And so at the end of the year, I want to be able to look back and see, did you achieve the 10? And so that's a metric that we'll be able to measure success on. And so if she achieves 11, so that she would have exceeded the expectations there. But that's a way in which we can really manage the scope of work that's being assigned to the teams while keeping them engaged and really bringing meaning into the work that they're doing. And one thing that I continuously do, as I've mentioned, I'm having increased meetings with each individual, with each team member on a one-on-one basis. And I can continuously review their work plans with them to say, are you meeting your shorter term goals? And if not, is this something that we should pivot from or readjust, or how can I better support you in meeting these goals? So it's not something that we're just trying to pass the time. It's something that we've just re-engaged, we've pivoted, we've refocused our vision, and the scope of the work that we're doing, but we're forging ahead and we're continuously striving towards meeting the overall goals and objectives of our organization and of our team.
That's great, Nalini. When you talk about I love that aim. I love that achievable, impactful, measurable. Love that. And when you're growing their capacity towards this, obviously you're clarifying a lot of things. I'm going to ask you just point blank, do you feel busier in the season or were you busier before COVID-19?
It's hard to believe, but I feel busier now. I feel like I'm seeing people a lot more now than I did before when we were in the office, because every meeting is via Zoom or through video conference. And I feel like because I'm taking measures to really connect with each team member more frequently, it is busier. But I think that we'll be, stronger for it in the end. I'm feeling that I'm really building relationships and capacity and really supporting and enabling the success of the team overall, which is rewarding for me. So.
Yeah, and I maybe accentuate that because I think I feel like I've never been busier, but I do feel a little bit, just if you're leading an organization or team, friends, whether it's volunteer or staff teams, this is a season where we as leaders need to be hustling because we're connecting in ways that maybe transcend what we would normally want. Well, maybe we need more margin and space for creating or innovating or other, but it's all about bringing everyone with us. And so I commend that. What a great, insightful acronym. I'm not going to forget, but a way to grow capacity in our teams, even as we're going through COVID-19. And this is a perfect pivot to you, Wilson, about growth and care, because as we're looking, and I think it's already been expressed really well by Phil and Nalini and yourself even earlier, care is a big aspect. It's not, for all of us, it can't be driven totally by the bottom line, although as leaders, you don't have the luxury of ignoring that. But it is caring for people who can care for people. But caring and growth can feel like conflicting values. Caring and growing accountability or capacity could. Wilson, can you talk to a little bit about, as a leader, when you're skating that line between care and growth, why are both necessary, and how do you cultivate them in a virtual environment?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a really interesting leadership model out there called the care and growth model. And the thrust behind it is that employees, team members, volunteers, they will follow leaders. They will be loyal to leaders that demonstrate care and growth. So care in the sense that recognizing that your team members are not just robots, they're not just machines, but they're real people. And so how can you support them, in a very tangible and concrete way? One of the best examples of this, I have an opportunity to coach different employees and executives. And one senior executive that I coached during this COVID time, he was talking about how in a span of 1 week, he scheduled 33 calls with his team members, 15-minute blocks, just to touch base. How are you doing? Are there any challenges you're going through? Any ways that I can support you? And I thought, what a fantastic way of this leader demonstrating that concept of care, to his team. So that's care. And then there's growth. Growth is the idea that team members need to know that you're not in it for your own selfish reasons. You're not in it for your own selfish agenda, but you're there for their best interest and for the best interest of the team and for the organization. And so I think team members really need to grasp that and understand that. And so how we do this kind of on a virtual level, I think the key word for me is being intentional. It's being purposeful about these things. It's keeping these things top of mind. So when you're having, these conversations with your team, over these online platforms, it's not just diving into the work, but it's really taking time to see, how are people actually doing? Some people right now during this social isolation, they're living all alone, feeling very, very isolated. Other people might be surrounded by people all day, and that actually can be, quite challenging and just trying to navigate some of those interpersonal dynamics. And there's all these different stresses, that we all face, whether it's, financial or health or relational, different stresses and anxieties. So we need to know as leaders that our team members are experiencing these things, and rather than to walk away from it, kind of to lean into those and actually to check in and actually see how they're really doing with those. In terms of the growth, I think it's really helping team members reach their potential. And so we are doing a lot of work in our organization around strengths-based conversations. The idea of what is your unique contribution? How can you leverage your natural edge into your workplace? And I really believe that as we start having strengths-based conversations, it's energizing, first of all, for that team member, that volunteer, because they're doing things in their zone. They're going to feel good about it. And as a result of that, they're going to produce results. They're going to add the most value to your team. Another thing for growth, I think, is taking the time to affirm and encourage. I think this is one aspect that we don't pay enough attention to. And I think it's just, it's not, again, not hard work, but it's being intentional about it. It's saying, hey, great job. And not just saying great job, but it's actually being specific, why they did a great job and how it impacted the team. So I think it's giving affirmation, encouragement. I think it's also, when it comes to growth, sometimes having difficult conversations as well. And I think that that's always something that, is a bit difficult for leaders sometimes. Maybe we don't want to hurt people's feelings. Maybe the conversation and relationship might get awkward later, but deep down, we know it's the right conversation to have. And so I think that in these times, that's where the care comes in, that if a team member and a volunteer, if they understand that you care about them, then that growth conversation, they're going to just receive that so much more because they know that you have their best interest in mind. And then I think for myself, things like setting goals, and we heard a little bit about this earlier about work plans, but helping set goals to help them be accountable, I think is important. Making sure those personal goals that people set are in line with the team's and organizational goals. So everything is growing together.
That's great. I mean, obviously an aspect of care. We were talking just before we went live. All of us have children. Some of them are older, some of them are younger. But if you care about your kids, care is not always a hug. Care is also a challenge. Care is also a development piece or a crucial conversation. And, if you're a leader out there, those are things, especially in the not-for-profit and church world, those difficult conversations are often difficult for pastors to have or for not-for-profit leaders because we love people. But part of loving them is having those conversations. And there's some great resources out there. Maybe the crew could jump in, but I know Crucial Conversations, Necessary Endings. These are all fantastic books that help people like me, that I love people. And it's sometimes I feel like love means we should all love each other and not have any conflict. But there is healthy conflict. And virtually, this will be interesting to watch out. I don't know if any of you, and I'll throw it out to you, you've had to have some tough, difficult virtual conversations with people. And how did that go? Anyone want to jump in?
Well, Jonathan, one of the things I've noticed when it came to some of the leaders that I've been working with in our company, what I've appreciated was their difficult conversations was also rooted in solid intention and solid motive. And there was, I think people appreciated their transparency, even though they were difficult conversations to have, whether it's, salary cuts or layoffs or things like that. But I think rooted in that, the leader is being authentic and open and being transparent, about that. And so I think there was an appreciation on the back end about it as well.
That's super. I love that. Solid intention and solid motives. So we're going to wrap it up here in a second. I want you to look into your crystal ball, if you would, all three of you. And I want you to look at the future of work. We've already alluded to much of it, little pieces here and there. Words like flexibility keep coming up. I think as you trust your team, and as I feel the same as you did in Express, Phil, I feel like our team has been equally productive and done so much virtually. And in some ways, I think we've even accomplished more than we were in analog environments. Analog environments are amazing too, but there is a lot of extra in analog environments that obviously some of that got trimmed away and people are actively engaged a bit more. But so looking to the future, and I'm thinking not-for-profit world, especially Nalini, you live in that world, but you also participate in a local church. Wilson, you're in that education plus marketing world, and Phil, you're right solidly in church world. What do you see changing? What's the future going to look like for work and how we work? And so maybe just take a couple minutes. Phil, we can start with you if you want to jump in first, but just what's the future of work going to look like? What excites you about that? And what are your concerns? But you're trying to not be that guy that's going to let the concerns drive the conversation. So go ahead.
Yeah, I think I alluded to a lot of this earlier already. I'm just excited for the hybrid model of what it looks like to have team offsite and onsite, knowing when they need to be onsite and knowing when we can allow the preference of offsite. For me, that's just a big thing. That's new for us in our orbit. That's something we're going to push towards. That's something we're going to really see throughout all our channels of our church here coming into play. And I think it's going to be a big win for us. Right now, what we're seeing is people are appreciating the flexibility, the ability to come in remotely. And so I think that's a big one for us there, Jonathan. What we're going to shoot after and just say, okay, can this be part of what we do as a team here? Concerns on that would be, you alluded to this, Wilson, and I loved what you had to say there about essentially feedback. I think feedback, specifically negative, works best in person, because when they know that you care and you need to take them to a next level in their leadership, or straighten something out in their leadership. I still have a concern that virtual isn't the biggest win for that. I tend to do that one-on-one in my office or go for a coffee or something like that, just to speak. Because care is so much. You talked also, Wilson, I think it was about the nonverbal communication. And so when you're giving feedback over negative, the nonverbal communication says so much in that as well. So for me, that would be a concern, but something that I would tap into and say those type of conversations I'd still want to see happen one-on-one or in person as much as we can. And so I think that'll be helpful. But those would be the two biggest things I'm saying, is the shift of the virtual more for us as a team perspective. So one of the things, can I just throw this in there, Jonathan? When you guys were talking about care, I think in this season more than ever, we need to just think through our employees' like mental state, their physical care, because some are just staying at home all day. Some are just, working through some of these dynamics of what does this mean mentally? How am I dealing with this? The anxiety, the stress. I'm seeing that come through in our team. And so I really appreciated what everyone had to say there in regards to care. I took some notes here as well, just to help me with our team. A win so far for us has been an online assessment of our team to see how they are doing mentally, physically, emotionally. We did that 2 weeks ago, and everyone came in and they had these scales and saying, I'm here today, I want to be there, or I wish I was there. And so it's helping all our department heads and leads deal with the team members and go, oh, okay, so this person's there, I know where my team's at, and just working through that. So just a tidbit, like an online survey that didn't take long for us to put together, has brought some really good next steps in health for us.
Well, Phil, to put you on the spot, I would normally say not to put you on the spot, but yes, to put you on the spot, if you could send that resource to us, we could put it up on the stackable.church page, just for an example that other people could build out a similar survey for their teams. That would be really helpful. I know even you talk about that virtual meeting, historically, I think and this is not a generational disparaging comment at all, but historically, the way work has been done in boomer environments, it's always been impersonal because you need to see the person to be accountable. And I think it's easier to move to that virtual and more flexible when you have positioned your team around outcomes and goals and less about hours. And I think a lot of, maybe some of you even listening, that's a great tool to be able to build that type of trust and that type of clarity and flexibility in the team, which I think if you're going to have emerging generations be a part of your leadership structures, whether on the volunteer side, if you're in a smaller church and you're trying to engage those younger generations, flexibility is a massive value. And it doesn't mean they don't want to work hard or can't work hard. In fact, quite the opposite. But that ability to be flexible and create more of an outcome-driven narratives as opposed to those traditional linear hour-driven narratives would be helpful. So Nalini, over to you. A future of work. Tell us exactly how this is all going to end.
Oh, let me just tell you how it's going to go. I was reading an article last week, and it was really interesting. It says that at the end of this pandemic, we would have been engaged in the largest work from home experiment that the world has ever seen. And just the fact that they positioned it that way was really interesting. But I think that, the outcome of this experiment will be directly impacted by how we respond to it as leaders. If it is that if this is going to be a success for us, it depends on how we embrace this opportunity. And so we really have to take advantage of making the most of this opportunity, equipping ourselves as leaders so that it's not only a successful experience for us, but for our teams. We owe it to them. And I think that when we come out of this, we're going to be stronger for it. We're going to be able to have an opportunity to have a greater, deeper appreciation for online capabilities. We'll have a strengthened relationship with our teams and a renewed perspective on how to further engage them. And I think that, we are already set up with at-home offices. This may actually result in a reduction in cost associated with external offices. But I think that this is the way of the future. And similar to what Phil was saying, it may be a hybrid of both. So who knows? Let's see.
I was talking to an economist recently, and he was talking about, and this would be a Toronto-specific example, but a company he was referencing that had 5 floors of one of the big towers in Toronto, and they've reduced it to 2 during COVID because they know they will be hybrid on the other side of this. And as a result, commercial real estate will take a massive hit because organizations have discovered quite quickly how nimble and how fast they can become if they need to be. Future of work, Wilson?
Yeah, when you mentioned before about outcomes, I think that resonated with me. And there's a few different terms I'm gonna throw out here. One is in being an intrapreneur. And this is actually, really interesting leadership term. It's the idea of, having somebody have an entrepreneur mindset, entrepreneur skills, but within a company or department or a team. So if you think about different skills and mindset an entrepreneur would have, like a visionary, or whether they can try new things, risk take, experiment, be resilient in failure. Be a great communicator. There's also a business savvy about them. I think that these are all kind of essential skills that I think that a person is going to start to need to adapt, into their portfolio of being an intrapreneur, within their team. And I think related to this idea of being an intrapreneur, there's another term, and I came across the literature called costivation. And I thought that was a fascinating term. Costivation is innovation with less. And so the idea of doing more with less, I think that in this kind of global economy, many companies obviously are struggling with their revenue. Budgets are being slashed like crazy. And so what can you do to bring that same level of excellence, that same level of, professional quality, or even more so, but with less resources? How can you be creative and cost effective at the same time? And that kind of leads me to the third point that I wanted to just introduce was this idea of personal branding. I think that for the future of work, I think that, even among a team, I think it's great that team members complement each other, but it's all kind of strength-based complementing. And out of that strength-based, there almost needs to be a personal branding for each team member that what is the differentiator for yourself? I like to call it the 3 Ps of personal branding. So what is your passion? So what are the things that you love to do? What are your proficiencies? So what are you great at? What are you better than most other people in the world at doing? And then the third one is pain point or the problem. So what is the challenge? What is the gap? What is that, area that, maybe the team or organization is struggling with that you can apply your passion and your proficiencies in that. So I just think the whole area of personal branding for, team members as they come together in a strength-based environment is going to be so important as well.
And that's fantastic. I love those 3 Ps, Wilson. I'm even thinking as staff members and teams and churches and organizations, increasingly, I think depending on the size of the organization you're a part of, headcounts are going to be interesting things and challenging things as budgets and things get shifted and moved and all of that. But always, it's funny, anyone who walks towards those pain points always has opportunity because it speaks to needs of others around you. But I love, though, you need to honor that individual brand with that passion and your proficiencies, the experience and the heart piece. That's fantastic. I've never heard it put that way. Is that original to you, putting you on the spot, Wilson?
It is, yes. But one thing that I will add as well, Jonathan, you mentioned, and we talked earlier about uncertainty. What I appreciate about uncertainty is when I see leaders and teams see the other side of it. It's almost like two sides of the same coin. So you have uncertainty on one side, but you have opportunity on the other side. And I think that leaders and teams that embrace this two sides of the same coin, those are the ones that are going to thrive. You might have seen this, but a couple of months ago, pretty much at the beginning of some of the lockdown in Toronto, the Toronto Symphony Orchestra, came up with some brilliant ways of now that we're all in all these individual homes, but yet how can we still create beautiful music together? And they pieced together this amazing orchestra, but all from their own individual homes. And that just kind of took the lid off of the challenge you're going through. And so for me, it's finding creativity in the chaos, or finding opportunity in the adversity. And teams and leaders that really embrace that are the ones that are going to thrive and be resilient through this.
Fantastic. Thanks, friends. And Richard, I'm wondering if you can jump in the chat room and throw the social media channels for each of these leaders, ways that people can connect with them in our chat line. But thank you, friends, for joining us for this live stream. I want to just mention that next week we have another live stream about virtual worship. So how do you experience spiritually a corporate moment individually, virtually, in a meaningful way? And so we're going to hear from a couple of worship leaders across Canada, Luke Stones from Victoria, Glad Tidings, Michelle Dridger, I hope I'm butchering her name, sorry, from Central Community Church in St. Catharines, Ontario, and Richard, who's in our chat room from One Church TO. And we're just going to have a conversation about leading worship virtually, the challenges of it. Again, a little bit like today, what's on the other side of this in terms of how to inform worship, and even how we're choosing to disciple people with that key piece of worship. So if you're a church leader, you may want to be here next Wednesday, 12 noon for that conversation. And then on the other side of that, we have Daniel Strickland will be joining us for a conversation about communicating through this moment and this change. So we're excited about some of the upcoming ones, but I want to say thank you, Nalini, Phil, and Wilson. You dropped some gems on us today. And I know I'll be listening back to this live stream to unpack some of the tips and the thoughts, and certainly even some of the acronyms that you provided for us today. Thank you, guys. They're all waving goodbye. You can't see them, but they're all waving goodbye. Goodbye, friends. Take care. Have a great day.